today to talk to you about a very serious issue: what to do when you lose your knitting mojo. I want to start by saying that it is completely normal to sometimes not feel like knitting. Especially if you were on social media, we can kind of get really wrapped up in the idea of being, a knitter with a capital K. We knit all the time, and it's okay to take breaks. It's okay if you go a couple of days or even a couple of weeks without knitting. It's fine. It's normal. It's not the end of the world. But if it's been longer than that and you really feel like you want to knit, but you just can't get your knitting mojo going, maybe you have some deadlines that you have approaching and you can't really afford to lose your knitting mojo, or whatever the reason that you need a little jump start. I'm just here today to give you a few suggestions for what you can do when you have sort of lost your knitting mojo. You're not really in the knitting mood, but you would like to be, and you'd like to jumpstart things and get back into your knitting groove. All right, so my first suggestion, when your knitting mojo kind of disappears, it can sometimes help to kind of clean your slate. I don't know about you, but when I have too many whips going, it feels like my knitting life is too cluttered, and I need some, even if it's not like actually actively cluttering up my physical space, I can feel like it's cluttering up my mental space. So my suggestion is to clear out your whips. So go through all of them, figure out what you actually still want to knit and what you don't, what has just been sitting there, what you're not excited about anymore. And try not to get wrapped up in sort of what we would call the sunk cost fallacy. It might be true that you have already spent 10 or 20 hours knitting something, so you feel like you should see it through. But whether you finish that project or not, those 10 or 20 hours are already gone. It doesn't matter. They're gone. You can't get them back. But that doesn't mean you have to spend 10 or 20 more hours finishing the project. If you're not excited about it anymore and it doesn't interest you and it's just cluttering up your mental knitting space, chuck it. Tear it out. Give it to somebody else who maybe is interested in your half-finished project, which apparently is a thing, and I wasn't aware of that, but apparently it is. Get it out of your whip basket, and kind of declutter your space so you are not spending any of your mental energy thinking about a project or projects that you're not actually interested in anymore. It's going to clear out some space for things that you are interested in, both physically and mentally, physical and mental space. So my first suggestion is definitely to just go through all of your whips and be honest with yourself and get rid of the stuff you're just not interested in anymore. Try to bring yourself back to a clean slate. Maybe not 0 whips, but only whips that you're actually interested in finishing and is still excited about. Sort of related to the whips is my second suggestion, which is rather than focusing on actually knitting, try fixing something. So if there is something in your whip basket that maybe is too short, or it's too long, or you dropped a stitch, or you have a miscrossed cable, try fixing that problem. It's a much smaller bit of action, but you get the satisfaction of having accomplished something, rather than, trying to finish an entire whip is maybe not where you're at. But if you can fix something, you get that sense of accomplishment that can be really motivating. You also maybe, depending on what the fix is, now are able to use something that's just been sitting there and cluttering up your whip basket. And most fixes, I think we can all agree, end up taking a lot less time than we think they're going to. Especially if it's something like a miscrossed cable, or it can be very intimidating to think about doing it, but once it's actually there in front of you and you set out to do it, it usually only takes a few minutes, So rather than having your whip basket cluttered with projects that are on hold because there is a problem, or having your mending basket full of knits that you are not using because they've sprung a hole, or the heel needs darning, or whatever the case may be. Take a few minutes, fix a relatively small problem, get that serotonin boost from your accomplishment, and that may jumpstart you to tackle larger problems that need fixing, or to get back into working on a regular full-size knitting project. So that sense of accomplishment, and especially if it involves completing something or making something usable that isn't currently usable, can be a real motivator. So that is my second suggestion for you. My next suggestion is to take a little time to just play with some yarn. So particularly play in your stash, whether that is just you have so much stash you're not even sure what's in there, going through it, rediscovering yarns you've forgotten about, whether that's reorganizing your stash. Maybe you don't have it organized at all, or maybe you have it organized by color and you want to mix things up and organize it by yarn weight, or whatever the case may be. Just taking the time to play with yarn in sort of a low pressure situation. You aren't being expected to accomplish anything. You're not trying to finish a project or to tackle something in your current knitting project that you have been finding very difficult. Just playing with yarn is really no pressure. But playing with color combinations, rediscovering yarns you forgot about, maybe planning yarns for future projects that you don't plan to immediately cast on, but you can have them there as motivation, can really just get you into that knitting frame of mind without the pressure of the actual knitting, without worrying about, is this project going to fit? Am I going to finish it on time? Why don't I feel motivated to work on this? Without all of those anxieties that might be coming up when you are trying to knit and really aren't finding the mojo. Playing with yarn is a whole different ballgame. It's knitting related, but there's no expectation there. It can be whatever you want it to be. All of those things can kind of clear a little bit of the mind clutter and give you a chance to think about knitting, think about yarn in a sort of low pressure, low stakes situation. So playing with your stash can be a sort of easy and fun way to sort of ease back into the knitting mindset without actually doing any knitting. In a similar vein, I would suggest taking a trip to your local yarn store, or if you're really lucky, a local fiber festival that maybe is taking place. Again, to get you into sort of the knitting frame of mind without the expectation of actually actively knitting. So both your local yarn shop and a fiber festival will have projects on display that you might find inspirational. They will obviously have yarn, and especially if you don't have a stash to play in, being able to handle some yarn may be motivating for you. Even if you have no intention of buying anything, there will also likely be people there that you can talk to about knitting. If you're not besties with the local yarn shop owner, maybe you don't want to be complaining to her about your lack of knitting mojo, but just general discussions of knitting and yarn and all things related to kind of get you into that knitting mood again. And this is especially true, obviously, at a fiber festival where there are lots and lots of people, and most of them are knitters and love to talk about knitting with other knitters. So just sort of being in the environment, not intending to necessarily to buy anything, but just to take in some of the inspiration, take in some of the enthusiasm that the people around you, whether it's in the local yarn shop or at a festival, also have for knitting. It can be sort of contagious. If you are in the mood to buy something at your local yarn shop or a festival, I want to suggest that you try something new. So maybe you always work with wool. Try a different fiber. Try some cotton, linen, silk, something like that. Maybe you always work with worsted weight yarn. Try something thinner. Maybe you always knit shawls. Try a hat. So just kind of to break up the monotony of your knitting hobby as it is and inject something new into it can really give you a nice jump start. Trying something different, maybe even outside of your comfort zone, even if you don't end up liking it, even if you don't end up finishing it, can really just kind of rewire your brain a little bit. And so maybe you try your hat and you decide you really do like shawls and you're really just not into hats. Great, but at least you tried something new, got out of your comfort zone a little bit, and it may, thank you, it may inspire you to bring new life to your usual, whether it's you usually have a standard yarn that you use. Maybe you got a little bored with it, but you try something else and it turns out there's a reason that's the yarn you always use. So just to kind of flip the script, get your brain thinking in a new way. Again, it doesn't have to end up being something that you actually like. Maybe it will be, but even if it's not, that's not really the point. It's really about just changing things up a little, and maybe gaining a new perspective can help jumpstart your knitting mojo. If after cleaning out your whips or just kind of taking stock of your whips, you realize what the problem is that you are just not interested in anything that you are knitting, you're not excited about it anymore, I think that is a great opportunity to browse Ravelry and Instagram and just look at all of the different kinds of projects that people are working on and get inspired to try something new. There's a big tendency in the knitting world for everybody to kind of knit like the same 10 or 12 patterns. Some designer releases something new and everybody kind of jumps on board immediately, and we don't always think, is this actually something that I want? Will I wear this? Will I use this? Will I enjoy knitting it? So it can be easy to get wrapped up in that and end up with a bunch of whips that you're not actually all that interested in. But there are literally millions of patterns on Ravelry, and while we on Instagram often see the same designers and patterns being knit, if you just take a little time to explore some of the knitting hashtags, and I'll try to include some of those in the description box down below, you can really discover new people doing different things, find designers you've never heard of, see, kind of new trends, new techniques that people are doing. It can really open your eyes, especially if you have kind of just gotten bogged down in looking, especially because the Instagram algorithm wants to show you like the same 5 people over and over again. If you put in a little bit of legwork, you can really discover some new stuff, some new people, some new ideas, some patterns that are, gorgeous, but that's not what is being shown to you in the hot right now or in your Instagram algorithm. But there's so much great stuff out there. So definitely a little browse on Ravelry or Instagram can be a really good way to jumpstart sort of your inspiration and get you excited again about knitting some new projects. Not everything has to be drop shoulder sweaters and brioche shawls. There's lots and lots of designers out there doing all kinds of different things. See what else is out there, and you might find that really inspiring and motivating to try some new projects and get your knitting mojo going. And my last suggestion is to buy yourself a little something knitting related, but not knitting, not a pattern, not yarn, but something else that you will be excited to use. So maybe just some stitch markers, a new project bag, a new tool that's, interesting and you've been meaning to try out. Something that you are excited to have a chance to use that isn't just, yarn and a pattern. All projects involve yarn and a pattern. So after a while, maybe that's not so motivating. But if you just treat yourself to a little something, and again, it doesn't have to be expensive, so just some stitch markers or one of those cute little progress keepers for to pin onto the front of your project, or I really love project bags. Those are a little bit pricier. You know, maybe a new little notions pouch, something that is going to bring an element of novelty to your next project, and something that, you know, you're going to be looking forward to using. So even if your knitting mojo isn't there, the excitement about being able to use your new thing may really help jumpstart your knitting motivation and get you going, even if you're not quite in that knitting mind space. All right, so those are my suggestions for when your knitting mojo seems to have disappeared and you would like to jumpstart it and get back into knitting again. With the caveat, as I said at the beginning, it's okay if you don't knit for a few days or a few weeks, or if you only knit in the winter and then you don't knit the rest of the year. All of those things are fine. There's no knitting police. No one's going to take away your knitting card. We all go through moods and seasons of our lives, and you know, sometimes you're just not in that knitting space. But for those times that you're not, but really want to be in that knitting space, I hope you found these suggestions somewhat useful. Thank you so much for joining me for another video here on the Media Peruana Knits YouTube channel. If you enjoyed or found this video useful, I hope you will give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, where I have lots of knitting vlogs and tutorials and podcasts and all kinds of knitting related content. I also have in the description box down below a link to a kind of suggestion box. If there's something that you would like to hear about here on the Media Peruana Knits channel, I hope you will fill that out and share your ideas. I would love to hear them. Thank you again for joining me, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye. It just kind of gets your brain moving. I don't know, the cat, she thinks I'm talking to her. I don't know. I know, you can't even see her. There she is. Come on, show them your little face there. Now they can see what is happening.